Welcome back. If you just joined us, we're now shifting gears to the discussion part where we're talking about Kenya's economic growth, which has slowed slightly to 4.6% in 2025, down from 4.7% in 2024, which is said to have been weighed down by weaker agricultural output and slower manufacturing activity. While data from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics Economic Survey 2026 shows the agriculture sector, still the backbone of the economy, was the main drag indeed on growth due to erratic rainfall. Well, at the same time, we do know President William Ruto recently said that the country is on the right path. But are we really? And how is the spending power of Kenyans at this time? We're delving deeper into this discussion tonight, and I'll just introduce my panel quickly. We do have here Simon Gishuki, the Secretary General of the Association of Public Sector General Supplies, and of course also Alexander Riithi, an economist, and Chachilo Gutu, Head of Research Capital at Capital A Investment Bank. We'll be bringing you more details on our panel. I just want us to quickly look at the figures here. We do know that ICT has gone down to 4.8% there. And I'll just begin with agriculture, actually. Well, ICT there, indeed, goes down to 4.8%. That's a decline. We also have there agriculture. Agriculture now stands at 2.8% in 2025, down from 4.3% a year earlier. And also we have manufacturing there. We'll just take a look at what's coming up. And so manufacturing growth is also slowed to 2.0% from 3.0% in 2024. And this is largely due to contraction in food-related industries. Also, just a look at transport and storage there. Transport and storage is said to have grew by 3.7%, while wholesale and retail trade expanded by 3.6%. We also have financial services and insurance, which at this moment stands at 6.5%. Indeed, a lot is happening there with our economy. And of course, also we have the accommodation and food services sectors, which remained resilient, with accommodation and food services growing by 15.6%. Public administration, of course, there, not to forget, is at 8.3%. And indeed, a lot more to mention there is construction, rebounded to 6.8% growth from a contraction. Gentlemen, if we look at the figures, we are hearing the president saying that things are looking okay, but we're seeing a decline in how the economy is faring. I just want to hear from you, Churchill. What do you make of these figures at this moment?
Thanks for having me there. First and foremost, looking at the economic survey where these figures were released, it's pretty much not surprising, because they are looking at the data as of the full year last year, and some of these numbers already we had them, so you kind of had seen them coming. If you look at the GDP numbers, I think the surprising was the fourth quarter, because if you look at the numbers from the first quarter to the third quarter, it was telling us that the average growth was around 4.9%. And then fourth quarter was 4%, and it dragged the average to 4.6%. So fourth quarter was quite was a negative surprise if you think about how the 2025 growth happened. But more so the agriculture. Agriculture is now the primary sector before you get into the manufacturing, which is now called the secondary sector, and also now the tertiary sectors, the services, but now agriculture, evidently now pulling the growth of the economy. So it's fourth quarter was the one that was the negative, and which sort of dragged the overall growth down. But evidently, to your comments, people have been saying, okay, whichever the number, be it 4.6, be it 5%, be it 6% growth rate, hardly felt on the ground, but we'll discuss further as the show rolls on.
Indeed. Yeah. Let's hear from you, Simon. What do you make of the numbers?
Okay, thank you very much for having me on the show. Some of the numbers I'm seeing there would have been attributed for a couple of things. One is, I think I just saw the hospitality sector is up. And I remembered we had a very big issue last year when we were trying to regulate the sector, mostly because of the huge numbers of what we would call the Juakali Hotel, or what you would call the Airbnbs. If you look at it as having been almost regulated, it means that the income will come in. If you look at the other sectors like agriculture, I think we must ask ourselves, how many people among ourselves have we seen going back from not only doing subsistence farming, but farming that actually brings food on the table? And that is largely attributed to another sector that I would say killed agriculture in a big way, and that is the real estate sector, where we were more comfortable with building homes and less farming. And also I agree with what you had said earlier about the drought. We had a lot about that, but we must also remember, I think a year or so before, we had a crisis with fertilizer, and we had, of course, with those issues, there was low output. So the last year, if we attribute a bit of rain and a bit of, I think most of us are going back not only to do subsistence farming, but to increase that. I've also seen you've mentioned issues to do with construction, and I think I would base that on a couple of things. That towards the end of 2025, there was what people say pesa ilipatikana for economy. And one of the things Kenyans do when there is a bit of money in your pocket is construction. If you also look at, like if I said on our part, the guys who supply garment, when it came to about November, October, there was a bit of pending bills that were settled. So, and that also attributes highly to construction industry. I don't know if you ever realized, but we easily use that as a future saving. Construct a home, construct a rental apartments here and there. That's said and done. In my own belief, I think we are doing badly in manufacturing. We cannot hinder importations or increase duty on everything importations, but we still don't have enough capacity to do what you will call manufacturing, and not just assembling. I think there is one aspect which we all must agree, is that difference between assembling and manufacturing. What we've been doing here is figuring out how we can assemble. What we need to move from is how we can do manufacturing. And not just by a way of saying the law will prohibit you exporting raw this, but do we have the structures? Have we put in the necessary taxes? Have we put in the necessary even enticement, incentives, to ensure that that organization based in China, based in US, based in UK, can invest here and be sure in the next 10, 20 years, they will recoup that. I think we must all agree at the end of the day that we will not grow without having figured out how to sort agriculture, how to sort out manufacturing. Thank you.
Alexander, your views?
Similar to my colleagues, I would say the numbers we are seeing indicate that yes, we grew, but at a declining rate. If you look at aggregate numbers, from 2023, we grew at 5.7. We came down to 4.7 last year. And now this report brings us to 4.6. So we've been sort of, yes, we are growing, but at a decreasing rate. When you look at agriculture, which my colleagues have spoken, the report indicates that part of the constraints, other than the poor rainfall that we had, and in my view, it was just for a short period between, say, November to around beginning of February. That is practically one season. The other major problem is the fact that input costs went up, and this made it difficult for anybody who was investing in agriculture. But what is more important is the fact that the ordinary Kenyan is saying, yes, you have said we grew by 4.6%, but we can't feel it in our pockets. When consumption cost of living is still going up, and we've even seen the inflation numbers. I think the report actually went as far as even pointing out the fact that inflation remained at 4.1% average for 2025. But for April, we are now at 5.6%. And this is largely due to the increase in fuel prices, due to the challenges that we are having. But the ordinary Kenyan is not feeling the growth that we are talking about here.
And that brings me to this very critical question, because yes, the economy is growing, but then there's a question of momentum. And the bigger question I know Kenyans are asking tonight is, okay, the economy is growing, but why does life feel still expensive, Churchill?
Well, and this is something that is quite interesting, and if you start unpacking it. So on one hand, when you talk about the growth of the economy at 4.6%, this is what you call in real terms. So essentially, the starting point is looking at it in the current pricing. So over the course of 2025, what was value added in the currency, in the amount as it was in 2025, and then comparing that with 2024. So if you do that, current pricing, so that is what you call in nominal terms. So the growth was around 8%. But if you sort of compare 2025 and 2024, and then you look at these two prices as if they were in 2016, so that's what you call real price, the real GDP, the 4.6%. So essentially what is saying that it's like standardizing everything and taking us back to 2016 and then looking at the growth rate of the economy. So that's pretty much what it's talking about. But that notwithstanding, it may be hard for mwananchi to comprehend that this growth is in real terms or in nominal terms. For them, and ultimately, is that the cost of living probably is quite high, and now takes us to inflation. Average over last year, 4.1%. So far, you've seen the numbers as of April, 5.6%, basically on what's happening right now. But ultimately, this is also comparing April 2025, 2026 vis-a-vis where the prices were in April last year. So that's pretty much the comparison. But also, this is the inflation rate is a basket of some commodities. So for instance, you have 10 different goods that you typically buy in any given month. So that is what is being tracked, the pricing of this basket last year and compared to this year, and also the different weightings, probably skewing it towards, say, your food items, as opposed to, say, transportation cost, for instance, and then they put it in that particular basket. So, but now this 5.6% is for the average of the whole country. But your consumption needs is different. My consumption needs are different from, say, Alexandra or Steve here, and also yours. So the pain points to mwananchi is issues such as fuel. For instance, you've seen how it galloped over the last review, and potentially, probably this is the biggest component in your consumption basket in fuel, and it's really gone higher. But yet, if you look at the CPI, fuel is around 2% of the overall index. So it's somehow hidden in the CPI, but whereas you're the one who is feeling the pain of fuel prices. So I think that's the disconnect that typically happens when you look at some of these big policy reports vis-a-vis what typically happens in an everyday undergoing. And that also connects even with the GDP numbers. So whatever the numbers is, people are not feeling it. And also, these numbers is now on the production side. There are different ways of even measuring growth, probably look at it, but there's expenditure way of looking at it. There's also the national income, looking at it. So for mwananchi on the ground, they will want to look at it more, the income that is accruing from the production. Yes, we're producing from the agriculture, from the industrial sector, from the services sector, but what is actually more of concern to them is now the income. It should be growing in tandem with what is being said. So I think that's the bigger question that we need to look at here.
Simon, I know, normally when we talk about earnings, just to bring it down to the layman's language, listening to what Churchill is saying, put it in simple terms. Why are Kenyans feeling the heat, and yet here the president is saying that we are on the right track? Are we really on the right track, Simon?
Okay. If I was to use a layman's language, is one, our policies over time affect a couple of things. Me and you are in an office and we are earning a certain salary. A policy is done that reduces my surplus, which means tomorrow I do not have a lot of disposable income. Another policy is done somewhere that affects agriculture, which means now the food I'm buying is a bit costly. Another policy is made that affects a sector like manufacturing, which means now I'm buying a few things at a higher cost. So when a Mwananchi says that the economy is not doing good, it's the policies that have been set, and I think this is where we also need to look at the role of parliament in setting some of these bad policies. And when those bad policies come, I think February this year, we were all affected by an increment in one of the statutories, which means your disposable income goes down. And a lot of these policies that are not handled well by what we call our the August House will impact on businesses, will impact on salaries, and ultimately, the cost that you pay called black tax become heavy on you. Remember, we have a salary, you have expenses, you have cost of living, and then you have black tax. So if no one is looking at how not only to stimulate growth in an economy, so that beyond you getting your salary, as you said, it increasing, you can be able to add on something else. I want you to look at the number of people who quit their jobs last year to either go to farming or to go into what you would call the digital cabs, or some who even quit to go and try doing outsourced work. This is a forex trading or outsourced work. Why are they doing it? Because of those calculations. But it all boils down to, as a nation, are we ready to have a discussion that we have the wrong policies that are not stimulating growth of our economy, are not stimulating growth of the key areas of our economy, whereas not only is our salaries remaining the same, some salaries are diminishing. Look at the number of businesses that closed down last year. And this doesn't boil down to whether an economy is performing A or B. The policies set out, and I love using the word policies because me and you will be governed by the Constitution, but will also be governed by the various acts that are passed in this parliament. And when an act is passed, and that person called the legislator hasn't come to ask you how things are running, what happens? I'll give you a practical example. Today we are here. I think we are a month or so to the budget. I haven't had any MP speaking about the pending bills. Pending bills is a debt to a company operational today in the Republic of Kenya. The more it's not paid, someone somewhere will be laid off. Some business will go down. Some people who are dependent on credit will now be on the red. So they will not be able to get the credit. So ultimately, when you ask that person running a business, how are you doing? He's running a big business, but because he's fallen back on the loans, the statutories, his credit has gone down. So what does it tell you about the economy? It's doing badly. Even if tomorrow you pump 100 million into the business, the policies are still bad. There's nothing much would happen. And that's
which are some of the policies that are really affecting the economic growth of the country?
One, a good example with agriculture. Why is it that every place in Kenya is a brick and mortar? So we want to grow agriculture, but we do not have a policy about land use in Kenya that restricts key areas on the same. Don't look at 50 kilometers from Nairobi. Everyone is looking, how do I subdivide land to an eighth to be able to sell? Look at the manufacturing industry in our country. What are we doing to stimulate investors to come into our country so that they're able to manufacture some of the things we import? Today, I'll give you a good example with the guys who are doing digital access. Are they able to continue in that business at the cost of fuel today? What are we doing to stimulate, for example, getting whatever you call, they're called not hybrid, after hybrid, the other one, the one that uses batteries alone.
EV.
The EV.
Electric vehicle.
What are we doing to stimulate that? But we keep on saying we are going to do it. The cost of electricity in our country is so high. I hear 3 years ago we were supposed to have some solar farm somewhere in Northeastern. What are we doing about such things? Because as much as me and you will sit and discuss, a law has to be made by someone. When it comes to pending bills, we are a month to not only a national budget, but counties' budget, how many of them have figured in pending bills as part of their debt? Because that almost $1 trillion, if half was to be paid, it will stimulate the economy. And those lawmakers, I think it's high time every time we are discussing a bad economy to remind them that the reason we elect them is so that they can make a policy to make better things for you today. We spoke about Nairobi, and if you look at the last 3 days, just imagine the number of property that has been destroyed. It wasn't because the people didn't know. It was about someone let down and did not implement a policy that destroyed businesses, and now people have to go to zero again. That cannot be me and you. It can only be the people we elect who are supposed to do the right things. Lastly, I'll put it like this. We are supposed to be exporters of products. How many products can we export as a country as of now? Because, and I'll say this not in a bad way, the people who are supposed to regulate our commodities so they are marketable out there, are they doing their job? So you'll do agriculture, you do a lot of it, you hear some countries have banned us. You as a farmer, you did everything right, but you didn't know there's some things that are not applicable in another country. There's a policy maker who is supposed to guide you on that. Are we really doing some of those things? So there are a lot of things we can discuss, but we also need to hold to account the policy makers.
All right. Alexander, brings us to this question. Given how things are looking in the economy, and of course Kenyans are crying, this is too much for us in our pockets. But is there anyone who's benefiting with the state of the economy as it is right now? Perhaps actors that we do not know of?
That's an interesting question. Now, if you look at how our country operates, for people in the business sector, which is supposed to generate most of the jobs, they depend on credit facilities from banks for them to expand whatever it is they are doing. But in this country, we've had a situation where government has decided to come and compete with the private sector in terms of borrowing. And once these funds are borrowed, we are not seeing them being utilized in a manner that will help stimulate the growth of the economy, but we are having heavy consumption. To give you just an example, if you look at the supplementary budget that was just passed the other day, we saw some offices getting almost double the allocation they had in the original budget. But when you look at whatever they are doing with that money, it's basically consumption. Holding rallies, hosting people, and that sort of a thing. That is not going to generate any tangible production. So basically what is happening now, we have a situation where the business community is competing with government to borrow. And ordinarily, if I am a lender and I have 100 people who want to come and borrow $1 billion shillings, and then I have to administer 100 people vis-a-vis government, who is one individual who never defaults, well, so far, never defaults, I will go for government instead of all the costs that I will incur in terms of following up these people. Now, if you look at even our papers, like the Standard here, a few years ago, we had the pages that had auction items. It was like half a page. Now, I am sure even tomorrow's paper, I will open several pages that have vehicles, land, and other collateral that are being auctioned, telling you that people are having difficulties even repaying. Last year, because this economic survey looks at last year, in August, the non-performing loans were at about 17%. It was the highest in the last 20 years. Now it has come down slightly to about 15.4 thereabout percent, but that is still very high, and that is why you're seeing many businesses are closing down, actually, people are even quitting jobs because it is becoming difficult to get numbers, especially those who are whose job is sales. People do not have disposable income for them to buy. So instead of you dying with a lot of pressure and PIPs and things of that nature, people are opting to just resign and go do something else. That's why even this economic survey, it talks of about 760 jobs that were created last year.
Indeed.
But a majority of those jobs were created in the informal sector, because the formal sector is declining because there are those challenges that we have mentioned.
Alexander, you mentioned something then. Just let's make mention of Kenya's 2026-2027 budget, which shows where the government is putting most of its money. Education takes the biggest share. But one of the major concerns, especially with these figures that you've mentioned briefly, is if Kenyans are taxed more, given the budget has gone up, what does that mean for the country? Alexander.
Well, when you tax us more, look at it this way. Anybody who is on a pay slip in 2022 had, this is the income, and then you had your payee and maybe NHIF, and that would be the end of your pay slip. Right now, your pay slip has something additional. It has housing levy, it has NSSF that was increased in February, and of course, what we are paying at the SHA is nothing comparable to what we were paying at the NHIF. So technically what has happened, your income has not grown, but the deductibles have increased. That means that your disposable income has reduced. Now compare that with the fact that prices of commodities have also been increasing. That is why you're seeing people who are saying, whatever I'm earning, whatever I was earning last year was much more than what I'm earning this year, but the cost of living is much higher. So that is why people are opting to just leave some of these formal sector jobs and go now to digital jobs and other things. That is why the informal sector seems to be growing. But the question is, what is the quality of these jobs that have been created in the informal sector vis-a-vis what would have created in the manufacturing sector if it was working properly, and then the services industry, like banking, communication, and so on, that will be as a result of the growth in this manufacturing sector. So that is where the challenges are, and this stems from the way we are doing our budgets and how government is competing with private sector in domestic borrowing.
You mentioned domestic borrowing. I was actually coming to that, Churchill. Given that the government's budget 2026-2027 seems like it's definitely going to go up, and that potentially we do not know what the government plans to do, but there are also conversations of the government planning to borrow domestically. What does that mean for, this MSMEs that are hoping to get credit? Like Alexander mentioned, the government seems to be competing with these business owners. Feels like a misplaced priorities for the government. What do you think, Churchill?
I mean, it's the starting point of the borrowing, whichever form, be it domestically or even externally, is the fact that our spending is higher than our revenue, so we have to borrow one way or another. Unless now we reach a point whereby we have a balanced budget, whereby our spending is pretty much where our revenues are, that's when we'll never be able to borrow. So because of the fact that we're spending, and also some of the items are what you call non-discretionary, interest payments you need to make, the wage bill, 700 billion thereabout in the next budget. We also have now what goes to counties. So these are now non-discretionary items which you need to pay in the budget are not flexible. So that's pretty much what is ballooning the spending. So borrowing is there, and it's quite a conundrum in the sense that now the government finds itself is not able to borrow as much from the external sources. Quite a number of external sources, be it from what you used to call the bilateral, say Kenya borrowing from China, on bilateral terms, multilateral, Kenya borrowing from World Bank, IMF. I think that window is shutting as time goes by. We see with the IMF, the program came to an end. We haven't seen a successor program. World Bank also, there's some conditions that have to be met before disbursement is made. And now we have what you call commercial borrowing, now the Eurobonds or syndicated loans, which is also quite expensive. So it means that by and large, they are also now sort of pivoting to domestic borrowing. I think with the supplementary budget for the current financial year, we are closer to 1 trillion in terms of the net borrowing. This is excluding the borrowing to repay the debt that is maturing. So it's quite elevated, and it speaks to what the concerns that you've raised, crowding out the private sector. It's a legitimate concern. We've seen also from the Central Bank of Kenya, they have reduced the lending rate. They're trying to ensure that as they are reducing the lending rate, banks are also able to transmit the lower lending rates to consumers. I think that's a debate that could warrant another show on its own, because we haven't seen probably that one being transmitted as much, but we've seen that there's a resolve by the Central Bank of Kenya to ensure that that transmits there. And also the other aspect that we are seeing is that there's high liquidity by that in the banking system for one reason or another. So they have high liquidity. So they're able now to sort of balance borrowing, lending to the government, and also at the same time lending to the private sector. The statistics as of January last year, it was actually negative, I think negative 2.9% private sector credit growth. But right now, I think it's done a turnaround, so it's close to 8.5% thereabout as of February, with all this transmission to the risk-based pricing model, that regime that we are in. So there are some positives, but still more needs to be done to ensure that even the opportunities in the private sector as they borrow is based on the opportunities that are there. The challenges that my co-panelists have raised are quite legitimate. So as the business environment improves, we can see that organic growth in terms of the lending by the private sector in the economy.
Simon, when we talk about change, because of course the Kenyans listening to us now might be asking, so where are we heading as a country? And this begs the question, if we were to have some good economic growth or change within our country that can be meaningful at household level, what will that look like, Simon?
Okay, before I answer that, let me handle something you mentioned when you asked about the taxation. Yes, we have a big tax that we pay. And I keep saying one of the biggest problems we have in our country is that very few people are the ones overtaxed. It's either by design or simply because some of the ruling class are heavily invested in the informal sector, and were it to be regulated, they would pay a lot of taxes. That's another problem. Another problem we have with taxation, as you said, rightfully, is your disposable income has reduced, and the only reason why you support taxation as a human being is because it invests in the social services of a country. So to say, if I'm heavily taxed, but I don't need to pay in a hospital, and even if I'm in the private sector, the public hospitals are functional, I am okay. Even if I am heavily taxed, and chances are my public transport system in my country is working, that means I do not need to drive every day to work. I reduce that part. If I'm in the same country and the cost of education is low, it means I am okay. But is that the case? No. It goes back to policy. Now, 3 things make great nations. When people make the right choices, who come into a guest house and set up good policies, then the prosperity of a nation is achieved. Now, back to the point about the budgets. How do we make our budgets? I think I was here 2 years ago and I said, we are too ambitious as a country such that we overburden the taxpayer. And we dash towards, we need to increase budget in military, in education, without asking ourselves, is it possible and is it doable? Right now, we are headed to a very difficult year. We've come from a place where right now economy is down. We are going to have about 3 or 4 supplementary budgets to increase things here and there because we headed to an election. And during an election year is when you expect a lot of things to stimulate so Kenyans have money. There'll be a lot of spending in the wrong sectors. When you ask about which sectors benefit when an economy is collapsing, as you rightfully said, the unregulated sector called digital banking, the Shylocks, are the ones placing the 16 pages in our newspapers. Why? You're in business. You run an organization. Suppliers are on your neck. They take you to court. You're auctioned. KRA comes, takes you to court. You're auctioned. The bank, you default. You're auctioned. All that means your assets are taken away. Now, the ripple effect of that auction is not that you've lost a house or a car. Is that with the house and car going, it means you'll either shut up your business, shut down your business, and the other thing that will happen is that even your own income that was supposed to supplement your home and the black tax has disappeared. So where are we left as Kenyans? We can do just so much. But as long as our policies are wrong, we will never achieve anything possible. They will tell you, from banking angle, they'll tell you, our banks can lend you up to a certain amount. But ask them to tell you how many people borrow a loan from a bank, but they have 3 or 4 loans with what you call credit-only firms or Shylocks. Today, people are being charged about 5 to 10% per month to access credit. Why? Because we live an economy where you're hoping in 3-4 months you'll be paid. If you default, you're on those newspapers. We have too much unregulated things in our country that things go wrong. Lastly, and I'll mention this, I don't think there's anyone who would not support a good budget-making process. How many of us actually get to analyze that 3-4 months before it's tabled in the main cities for discussion? It's actually, I think, tabled in only 1 or 2 main cities. But it's supposed to affect 50 million Kenyans who only get to see a final document 2 or 3 weeks, and their input is never even considered. So if you ask me today, not even national, you'll be very shocked at how much crisis is in the counties because of the same budgets. You had education is at 105, it's called 105 billion. Yet, you as a parent is still burdened with high levels of school fees. So how does that help you as a person? Lastly, the counties are investing too much in their budgets on what you would call feeder road infrastructure that is supposed to give, to have a ripple effect on agriculture. Now go and tell us if those roads are being made. So as much as we are investing, we're also very misusing almost 60% of our budgets in projects that do not help our country.
So Simon, it feels like, and listening to you, the government's priorities are not in any way aligned with the citizens' needs?
I would say the policy of our country does not in any way reflect the problems of our country.
All right. Alexander, very strong remarks there, Simon, thank you. Well, Alexander, when we look at the deteriorating economy we're in right now, there's been a conversation there from especially some of the political leaders who are really, really disgruntled about how the country is being run. Of course, there we've seen Kiharo, Member of Parliament, Ndindi Nyoro, talking about the economic performance. And one of the key issues he mentioned is the need to focus on growing productivity, which is, in any case, ensuring the manufacturing sector grows. What's the significance of this manufacturing sector, Alexander?
Well, the manufacturing sector has various ripple effects. One, given that our largest revenue, our largest contributor to our GDP is agriculture, that automatically tells you that most of the raw materials for our agro processing will come from there, whether it's coffee, tea, macadamia, avocado, and so on, or even maize. So once you have manufacturing happening, you have now agriculture will also benefit from that because they'll be supplying raw materials to some of these sectors. Then on the other hand, once manufacturing is working, then there will be need now for the services sector, whether it is insurance, banking, communication, transport, and logistics. So it is all a chain that will be linked with manufacturing. What my colleague here has said, the minute we go now into importing almost everything, whether it's clothes, toothpick, matchboxes, everything, it means we are exporting a lot of jobs to the destinations where we are importing these items from. But if that manufacturing was to happen here in the country, and some of these things are things that can be done. For instance, I believe in our country it is possible for us to turn our leather into shoes. If you look at the number of shoes that are imported into this country, while our farmers out there, they are throwing away their hides and skin. If we were to invest in just that particular line and ensure that we are not wasting any hide and skin, and we have manufacturing of shoes in this country, like all our high schools, they all part of school uniform is the leather shoes. Most of the men, their official wear is the leather shoes. So there is already a market for that particular product. If we were to invest that way and ensure that the policies that the co-panelist is talking about, we ensure that there are tax incentives for people who are investing in that business. We ensure that we have tariffs, energy tariffs that are friendly. We have water that is adequate for that particular line. Then we will have very many people employed within the manufacturing plants. Then after that, now you have distribution. When it comes to distribution, then you have now other people setting up businesses to now sell these shoes and so on. Then banks and others will come in. So this is a whole ecosystem that will support so many people if we just invested in that particular area. And that is why I agree with the sentiments that we need to focus more on manufacturing.
Would you say perhaps there's an over-reliance on agriculture, by the way? Because I know it's our bread and basket, but is there another way?
Well, the old agrarian revolution theory dictates that you have to have investment in agriculture. Then after you invest in agriculture, it produces raw materials for the manufacturing sector. Then the manufacturing sector, once it thrives, it will give rise to the services sector. But the interesting thing in our country, we sort of skipped the manufacturing bit and we went into services sector. Now it is either agriculture as the largest contributor, the second largest goes to services sector. It is either transport and logistics or ICT. I have seen in this survey, mining and quarrying has come up quite well. I hope we utilize these natural resources that we have found so that they do not become a curse like it has happened in other countries. And again, now comes back to the policies. I have seen Parliament, we have what we are calling the Sovereign Wealth Fund Bill. These are things that we need to work on and ensure that even as these new revenue streams are coming, we manage them for the current generation and for the future generation. This should not now lead us into more and more consumption. But linked to this, if you look at our political environment, we are in May of 2026. Anybody who is not Kenyan, if they came into this country and watched your news, they would imagine there is an election in Kenya in the next 2 or 3 months. But the election is in August of 2027. We have more than a year to there. Those who are in business will tell you, nobody wants to come and invest in a country that you're not too sure what will happen tomorrow. You find a senior member of our political class is beaten up in some place. Some others are not allowed to go into some small town. I live not far away from Kikuyu. And one of these weekends, somebody had decided to come and visit the place. We couldn't leave our houses. Who now wants to invest in such a place? So there are many things that are happening in our country that are leading to the problems that we are seeing here that should be corrected. And even our political class should even tone down and allow people to work. And then when it comes to elections time, we will go into campaigns and we will vote wisely.
They're more worried about getting into certain seats than attending to the needs of the Kenyans, Precisely. Right? I see Simon, you
I wanted to add to what he said about, when you asked about agriculture, and one of the things that has to go hand in hand with agriculture is policies that will make farming not only profitable, but long-term. Growing up, I think we were all very cautious about things like reforestation. Because at the end of the day, you knew rainfall is required. People are more keen about rivers and dams. Today, we are more keen about dams for profit making. Where can we do a dam because we can make money? We are not keen about how we can preserve rivers, which are key in some of the areas. We are not even keen about how we can preserve forests on my little, is it agricultural biology, tells me you require a lot of rain in some of these areas. Because we must ask ourselves, how do we build a culture where, because we have too much land, and if reforestation happened, we would actually have natural rain in most of these areas. Now, that unpredictability means I am not sure of this season, because I'm not sure I'll be able to harvest. Secondly, if I go into this business, remember agriculture is devolved. That means there'll be too much policies brought in by the county governments. How many of those policies are anti-agriculture? And how many of them are pro? For example, I can't remember the county, but there's a county where you need a license to have chicken at home. I don't want to mention the county, but it was a joke to even rear chicken at home. And you can imagine how many people today, we have too much deficit of eggs. We have too much demand for milk. There are countries in Africa that can't have cattle, but they require a lot of milk. Yet, we're in the equatorial. I think one of the things we forget is that God placed us in a very good area where if we preserve the whatever you call meat and everything, the environment, we would have farming thriving. Now, if farming is thriving, it reduces part of your expenses that you spend on food. But do you ever consider that? No. Why? Because the policymakers are subsidized through our taxes. The moment we are able to push for policies that can make some of these things make sense, then that issue of agriculture being pushed will make sense. The farm machinery. We used to have, I think we used to even have the likes of KFA, we used to have AFC, we used to have ADC that would actually do that. Remember, even today farming requires capital. Our banks are too profit. That means you could have a perfect plan for dairy farming in a very good area, but what is the access to capital? Because some of these agriculture things we're saying, you'll either do them because SACCOs will support you, or because you're part of a group that will come together and pool resources. So agriculture requires a lot of not only individual investment, but people to be involved in policy decisions that make it easier for you to go into that. It is very, you look at farming in America, and you keep wondering, someone telling you, I quit the big city to come do farming. Or even Netherlands. I think Netherlands is one of the biggest producers. It's either milk or meat. Yet it is smaller than most of the states. Why? Because the right policies were put in. Today, there's a time we used to have surplus of maize.
And but I was coming to that, just looking in retrospect how things were in the past. If you compare the current administration, the policies we have at this time, compared to previous administrations, then let's not go too far. Let's go to Kibaki's era, where people say during that time the economy was in very, very good shape compared to now. What would be your comparison, Simon, of policies then and policies now?
You know, the most shocking thing, and I think this started with the end of Kibaki and start of Uhuru. Anytime there's a bit of drought, there's always a crook somewhere with 4 billion and a ship waiting near Mombasa. And instead of announcing how we're going to ensure the next season is sorted, we are discussing how we are going to give this guy duty-free tariffs to bring in the maize. So who really wants to invest? Even the policymakers know, all I'm doing is looking for money so the three of us can have 2 billion for the next ship in time there's a drought. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but because we have commercialized even the decisions that are made by policymakers. Because at the end of the day, even is it a few months ago, there might be a bit of drought. We are buying maize from a poor country like Malawi. Surely. There's a ship waiting near the coast. So those policymakers are not caring about me and you, because any crisis in either sector is an opportunity for them to import quick. Look at the oil. We had a crisis for 2-3 days. There's an oil somewhere waiting, and there's a loose 4 billion to buy that oil. So who really wants to improve in that sector? Even the policymakers themselves. You had our good minister for oil being asked what we have in Takana. So who can we blame? Whatever we get as policymakers is what we consume every single day.
Now, Simon, of course, you shed some very good light there on how things are looking. But perhaps there's a Kenyan who's asking, what do we do? What do we do as Kenyans? Now, we have the leaders in government, but we are looking at the policies you're talking about. They're not in support of growing the economy or supporting businesses or people who want to go into agriculture. So what can we do as a citizenry? What action can Kenyans take to address this issue?
The reason I'm laughing is because the biggest crisis you have as a Kenyan is not who is your president, is not who is your governor. That's not your crisis. It is the caliber of MP, member of parliament, which is the National Assembly, Senate, and the caliber of your MCAs. As long as you elect the worst of your society, that is what you get. Look, all of you, look at yourself here. Ask yourself, who is your MP? What does he understand? Have you ever had him or her contributing? I can tell you my MP, I called him one day, Dr. Washira, and asked him, Karani, tell me about this finance bill when we had droughts in town. He told me, nigani hajakufurahisha kwa hizo. Juu mimi nimeona iko sawa. Then I asked him, I think it was pads. There was something that were increasing. And I told him, the area we come from has a lot of, I would call them underprivileged as you go to north of Laikipia. And why would we tax such things? Hiyo sijaona. And that's the man elected by almost 100,000.
So it's upon the Kenyans now to start considering
if you need
who
good policies, elect MPs, that is a member of National Assembly, member of Senate, with brains. What we have are robots. As long as we have robots, they are switched on and off. This hole is going to get even deeper. Right. Even the MCAs you're having today, ask them right now, what is going to affect you in the next 2 years is the policies your MCAs are making. We're already in very big holes, deep holes. We are saying elect someone as an MCA because he's a young guy, he just cleared university. What does he know about agriculture, about natural resources, about county government
So we need leaders who are knowledgeable and who can meaningfully contribute to the development of their counties. Churchill, a very big conversation, especially for the young people. Job creation. Well, roughly 800,000 Kenyans enter the labor market every year, right? But only about 100,000 find opportunity in the formal sector. Yeah. What would you make of the current employment situation in the country, Churchill?
Not surprising that the scale of the employment is now within the informal sector. Close to 84% of the total employment is in the informal sector, whereas close to 3.5 million are in the formal sector. So it just shows how the opportunities are not quite vibrant in the economy. It's not that it is a bad thing that we have this kind of skill, but ultimately it's quite telling. But even if you look at the formal sector employment, there's 3.5 million or 3.3 million within the formal sector. You find that 500,000 of them are casual laborers. So it's also quite, there's a dichotomy even within the formal employment. So it's quite dire. And it speaks also to some of the issues that we've had around the taxation issues in terms of, if you look at taxation broadly, they're either taxing income, so that's on the corporate side, or personal individual taxes now on personal. There's also the taxes on consumption, the VAT, the excise, and also now there's taxes on international trade, customs, and all that. So as we are having the formal sector and also the ones that you can actually, that are able, the pensionable, permanent and pensionable, being quite a smaller proportion of the total employment, it just shows even the limits as far as taxation is concerned. And the bigger issue, if you look at the policies that has been raised in the panel here, it's not that we don't have policies. We do have policies, right from we started with, we've been having national development plans since 1963. Right when Kibaki came in 2002, we had the economic recovery strategy for the 5 years till 2008. And then after that, we've had Vision 2030. from 2008 should go all the way to 2030, in the sense that being implemented in 5-year plans, which you call medium-term plans. So you can think about it, the first medium-term plan focusing on the economic pillar, the devolution came in place. The second one was now after that, the first one was now on the constitution. The second one was now devolution between 2013 and 2017. And then from that, we've had what we used to call the big four from 2017 to 2022. Right now, we are in the fourth medium-term plan, but also the targets, when you talk about employment, is all about the skew of the formal employment should go to 40%, whereas informal should come down to 60%. How far are we in terms of, the bigger question is, how far are we in terms of achieving the Vision 2030? We just have 4 years to go. And if you sort of now look at it, be it employment, be it also manufacturing that was discussed, the target was to be able to grow the share of manufacturing to 15% of the GDP. Right now, I think it's 8%, pretty much where we were when this Big Four agenda came in 2017. So we are still stagnating, and compare with a country such as Saudi Arabia, which also is implementing its own Vision 2030. One of their targets was now to reduce the proportion of dependency in oil sector, which was quite significant, and now diversify away from the non-oil sector. And you're seeing the efforts that they've been doing, getting into all this kind of things, ports, infrastructure, pretty much diversifying away from oil dependency. And you can pretty much say for sure they'll be able to meet this Vision 2030 compared to how Kenya we are doing that. So that's pretty much just round and long of your question around even the employment, that more needed to have been done in terms of if that this is the deliberate target that we need to achieve by 2030 in terms of growing the formal share of employment. What are the measures that needs to be done? And if we diverted at any point, and now speaks to the politics, are our leaders all aligned in terms of this is the bigger picture, that by 2030 this is where economy should be, such that any subsequent or any successive leaders will not divert away from the plan and come up with their own pet projects and sort of moving away further from this grandiose plan. So that's the thing, even if you start thinking about crafting be it 2050, 2060 for Kenya, but ultimately with the politics as it is in the country is quite combative, and with the stakes quite high, it means that probably even whatever goal that may come and succeed Vision 2030, we may not be able to attain it because of the nature of politics. So we need to stick to our policies to be able to sort of meet some of these goals.
You know, it feels usually like every head of state comes in, like you've mentioned, not building on what was previously being done. Everyone wants to come and leave a legacy of their own, you know. But one of the key things that Alexander Inu mentioned earlier on, and I just want to shoot that question to you, Churchill, is the quality of jobs. Because the president says, hey, we have generated more than 640,000 jobs, below the 1 million target. But even if these jobs have been created, would you say that this, and many of these jobs are in the informal sector, by
Absolutely,
the way,
yeah.
What's the quality of the jobs? Because again, these people with the jobs that they want to be taxed, and the government is looking for money to do business. Again, we've established in this conversation, much of that money, as we've seen, is perhaps not being spent wisely. What's the quality of the jobs, Churchill?
I mean, if you look at I may not look at the quality, but probably if you look at the flavor of the employment in the informal, one, it's low barrier of entry. The 18 million jobs in the, or close to 18 million jobs in the informal sector, it's heavily skewed towards wholesale and retail. So think of the hawker in the street selling whatever they're selling, and also within the hospitality, the food and restaurant industry, the kibandaski. So those kind of sectors, I mean, there's a low barrier of entry. You just need your small capital, and then you're just out there in the street. You don't need to register the business. You don't need to. I mean, unlike the formal businesses, how the processes are, this one is much more. It's easy to enter into the business, and also we have all this digital economy that is happening, hence even within the wholesale and retail. So it speaks also to one that there's no opportunities within the formal sector. If you look at even the number of graduates coming year in, year out from the universities, and the kind of opportunities within the formal sector, is not able to absorb the graduates that are coming out. So that speaks now to people just taking whatever is easier to come by, so as to be able to eke a living. Ultimately, if you think about the national income, ideally, so we have the GDP, which is now the production. You're producing the produce, but you can also look at it in two other ways. That people are spending money to be able to buy this production, and also there's income that people are earning to be able to sort of get into. So production, expenditure, and income, there's a way that they tie in. Even KNBS statistics showed that. But if you look at it from the national perspective, you find that the breakdown of the income, if you may just narrow into that, 25% of the national income is what goes to paying salaries in the economy. So if you sort of now, rather than look at GDP or the economy in terms of the production, this agriculture, but now look at it in income. So 25% of that is now payment of salaries. There's 50% of that is now what you call the profits by businesses. And then you have investments, income. So basically, you're putting money to be able to grow your stock one way or another. So that's another 10%. And then the balance is now taxes. So that's disaggregation of income in the national account. But if you sort of now come down to an individual, ideally, the income that you get, you are able now to sort of pay your workers. If you're there's a profit that is coming in, there's some money that is lying that you probably may need to expand your business. But now for informal employee, you find that most of the money they're getting, because you're just a self-entrepreneur, so to speak, all the money you're getting is now for profit. You don't, because now this profit is what you pay yourself. You need to expand the business and things like that. So that is what is coming into the fore, that people are pretty much living hand to mouth, that the money they're getting is covering everything. Like ideally what should be for a formal business, they're able to pay their salaries, they're able to expand their business, they're able now to have some profits to go about. But now for the informal sector, it's just basically the money I'm getting in, because it probably may not be taxed, it's not registered formally. So hand to mouth. So that's pretty much the numbers, what these numbers that is coming out.
Does this spell of stability for a country like Kenya, given what you're talking about?
We may not entirely run away from not having an informal sector or graduating our economy to be formalized because of the nature of where we are right now, lack of opportunities, and also this opportunity, or also these other opportunities that have come in, digital, people embracing the digital economy, so people are able to get into this kind of employment. We may not entirely run away from that, but ultimately, if we are able now to ensure that the formal businesses or people are able, formal businesses are able to expand, they're able now to even absorb the graduates as they're coming in. So that speaks to the human capital that we're having. Is it an issue of our education system? Is it an issue of the mismatch between what the education system is giving and what is needed on the ground in terms of the formal employment?
All right.
I think that's a bigger conversation.
All right. Wonderful. I just want to hear your final remarks as we go, because, of course, the Kenyan who's listening today is asking, perhaps, should we tighten our belts given what is happening in the country? And I'll just begin with you, Alexander. Your final remarks, future projections. Ambia Kenya, what should they expect in the coming days given what is happening with the economy?
Thank you. Unfortunately, I do not have very good news. Looking at where inflation is in April, and the supply chain disruptions we are having due to the challenges we are having in Iran, plus our internal domestic challenges where we have started early campaigns, I just expect that inflation is going to go up. Once that happens, central bank will react by increasing the interest rates. I think actually last week, we saw the treasury bills increase from 7% to 8%, and we expect the auction this week, it's going to go even higher. So I am not seeing things easing going into the future. So we need to brace ourselves, but our leaders also need to, as they tell us to tighten our belts, we also need to see them tightening their belts in terms of how they spend the monies that we are paying so painfully through our taxes.
All right, Simon.
Okay. We are heading towards a financial year where nothing happens. Everyone is trying to save their skin. Our politicians are trying to fight either a re-election or they are leaving the office or they do not basically care. That said and done, we are also in, I keep saying this 2026, 2027 has one of the most informed generation, understanding every bit of what happens in our guest house. Are we able to influence? We may not, because again, we are fed too much misinformation. That has really a big impact, even when you want to invest in a certain sector. Because one of the sources you look for is credible government information, and then, as you say, unenda ground kuangalia vile maneno iko. Now, ground will be you trying to figure out those before you, what have they done. Again, there is a big push, I think, by everyone to try and formalize what we call the informal sector, to bring them either into the tax bracket or to be able to also regulate it here and there. But we must also ask ourselves, are we ready to also be accountable? Because once we regulate sectors, what makes all of us fall back to either an informal sector is when you are not able to hold anyone into account, either because the sector you operate in, a few laws are required here and there, and it might cost you an arm and a leg to even get your MPs to discuss that law, or it may never be discussed. So we are in a season where, depending on the sector you are in, be intelligent enough to follow the law, be intelligent enough to also understand that as much as we will hope the sectors to grow, much of it will be dependent a lot on the crisis or the chaos we'll have in the campaigns between now and the election.
All right, let's hear from you, Churchill.
Seconding Alexander's views, we need just to buckle up, tighten our belts, to be able to overcome some of these near-term crises, some of them externally, the fuel crisis. So I think that's the parting message to our viewers. Yeah.
So Kenyans need to tighten their belts. Yeah. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for making time. We have Alexander Riithi, who is an economist. Thank you for coming. Also, Simon Gishuki, the Secretary General for the Association of Public Sector General Supplies. Thank you so much for your views. And also, Churchill Ogutu, the Head of Research at Capital A Investment Bank. Gentlemen, this was a very insightful discussion. We hope to continue having this discussion to at least enlighten Kenyans more. My name is Leangari, and my sign language interpreter this evening has been Meresha Obiti. As always, it's a pleasure to have you join us, to have a good night, and the Lord bless you.